Welcome, everybody, to Fascia Freedom Fighters. I'm talking with Katy Bowman today. I'm very excited. Those of you who read the site know that I'm a major fan. So just to introduce you, for those of you who aren't familiar with Katy's work, you are the founder of the Restorative Exercise Institute, the author of Well Aligned and Well, the blog, which is excellent, and everyone should check it out. The Katy Says blog is off that site. And two books, one of which is forthcoming. The book you already have out there in the world is Every Woman's Guide to Foot Pain Relief, which is excellent, and I send it to a lot of the dudes too. The men also benefit a lot from it. And your upcoming book is Alignment Matters. So you've got a lot of good resources out there. And you basically, to my mind, you're a biomechanist. I should say that first and foremost, so people know, what you're living under professionally, what you are. And one of the quotes, I was having a conversation with somebody recently, like in the last couple of weeks, where I was talking about the whole sitting is the new smoking research that's out now, where it's really talking about that it cause mortality, death from all causes, risk of cancers, stroke, diabetes, everything. Everything gets worse the more hours you sit. And they just kept kind of poo-pooing it, like, yeah, I know, we all know we have an inactivity problem in our country, blah, blah, blah. We've talked about it already. And I couldn't find the way to articulate it until I found a perfectly written sentence, of course, that you wrote on your blog where you said, we don't have an inactivity problem, we have a geometry problem. So I'd like to, hand the floor to you to explain what you mean by that, because I think it's so important that people get the distinction.
Whoa.
Just go with that.
And thank you for saying it was perfectly written. I don't think of anything that I've ever written as perfectly written. But
no
it might
writer
have
does.
been. It might have been just a different. It might have just been a different take on a problem. So it's not that it's not an inactivity problem. We
Right.
absolutely are suffering from an inactivity problem.
Sure.
So that's so global, we can just set that aside, because now what we have is we have two populations. One population moves a lot. We have exercisers, right? We have people who are like, I'm not inactive, I move a ton. And then we've got like exercise a ton. And then we have people who are professional laborers, like your UPS delivery person. You've got people who do manual labor, harvesting plants, all the food that we eat. You've got a lot of people who do manual labor. And then you have a population who is fairly sedentary and does not exercise. So those are three separate populations. And the interesting thing about those three separate populations is they're all getting differing amounts of movement or activity, yet they all have the same issues with health. So that's a huge concept, because what we're kind of sold is that if you just exercise, you will be outside of this, disease box, and everyone's going to die at some point, right? We're not trying to avoid death, but I'm talking, my platform is less to do with, live forever, and it's more about like, what is your physical experience like? So there's a different way, like movement is such a gross, meaning not disgusting, but like a large scale view of the problem, because like, okay, this population's moving, this population's not. But when you look at it from a geometrical perspective, it's like, just because someone's moving doesn't mean all of them are moving.
Yeah.
You can actually quantify movement. You can break it down into data points, and you can plot that onto a graph, and then you can see how someone may be exercising and still not be moving that much. Someone may be moving around all of the time, but when we quantify movement on a more thorough scale than is your movement on or off, we begin to see what's happening down on the cellular level. And we definitely all we're suffering from a geometrical issue, because all those three groups, whether they're exercising or they're doing manual labor or they're doing nothing, your total couch potato-itis who has this desk job and then just sits when they're done with their desk job, the difference between their geometry in their body is very little, meaning they're doing pretty much the same amount of movements at the joint axes. So another way of saying that is, we're moving, you could be moving a lot, but within such a small or narrow range of motion that you're not able to do what movement is supposed to be doing for you, which is delivering nutrients, is supposed to be moving waste product out. But even more on a cellular level, movement is the stimulation, the mechanical stimulation that gives a cell context on how to rearrange its DNA within the nucleus that creates the body that you have. And so when you use very small or narrow ranges of motion, even if the frequency of those ranges of motion goes, to someone who moves, 75 minutes a day without fail, or I move all day long, when you're within that small or narrow range of motion, your body adapts to that. It doesn't really see the picture between those three, why it seems great to us, because the only variable we have is where you're moving or not. We don't look at it from a geometrical perspective to say you basically become that position or small range of motion that you frequent the most. And then that's what you're talking about. That's what all of the fascia freedom fighters are trying to help mobilize. We're trying to help mobilize areas, and then everyone's got a kind of a different piece of that puzzle. It's like we got to mobilize, and then we have to use greater range of motion, but then there's even the philosophical. It's like we have to put back the requirement of using more ranges of motion into our lives so that we don't have to continue to do repair. At some point you kind of go, at what point am I going to stop repair and just stop the damage part? So there's so many components, and you've got such a great team put together. So kudos to you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that hopefully people get it, because we talk a lot about kind of we, meaning the larger culture, the damage of our work environment, that we're either sitting or standing, at our computers, and we turn into, I'm standing, so you can't really see me, but we turn into this person. And so people think that they can sort of repent their sins of sitting all day by going to the gym. And so, because I think people have some understanding that we kind of solidify into our work position, can you talk a little bit more about how you mean it with people who exercise? Because I think for a lot of people there's a disrupt, like, well, when I go to the gym, I move around a bunch.
Right. And what was so important about that sitting research that's been going on for 20-something years. I mean, if you look back, it kind of made it into media now. Thank goodness for the internet where things get widespread, but it's quite old. It's not like something that's in the last 2 years. They've been looking at sitting and cancers for over 20 years. And yet we haven't seen it on the cover of Time magazine, because what are people going to do? It's like, we have to sit.
Right.
The important piece about that was that the risk held true whether you were an exerciser or not, meaning that you can't undo sitting. You can't undo what you do for 8 hours a day by doing something else more vigorously for 1 hour. And I think that intensity is that variable that's hard for us to grasp. It's like, well, I know I was sitting, but if I run real hard during that hour, or if I do something where my heart rate goes up, doesn't that kind of like count more? Like, don't I get more coins in the bucket of habit if it's harder? And that's the thing that I'm here to say is no, you do not.
Yeah.
You get quarters in your cellular bucket for frequency, not for intensity. So if you have your knee in one position for 10 hours, that's a lot of quarters paying for that joint configuration to become morphed. Because adaptation does not mean improvement. And I think that we've kind of used the terms of, I've adapted. It's like, adaptation simply means that you've altered your structure to make what you do easier on you. It's not that you've strengthened a particular set of tissues so that you won't get hurt necessarily when you do it. It just is, it's a way of the body to kind of conserve energy. It's like, well, if you sit 10 hours a day or, 15 hours a day, which most people do, even your super duper exercisers, by the time you take a yoga class and you took a walk, but if you still are kind of stuck in this sitting rut, the frequency of movement's very small. And so you're not undoing what you think you're doing. It's kind of like, it's like that mentality of, if I smoke, I'll just run.
Right. And then all the smoking will go away.
Right. I'll smoke and that damages my lungs, but I'll run because that's supposed to be good for my lungs. And I try to opposite
That's a great analogy.
yeah, the opposite of smoking is not running, it's not smoking. So,
Right.
so it's like we do a lot of kind of balance, right? It's like, oh, I ate too much, I'll just exercise more. And
Yeah.
again, that doesn't work either. There's
Yeah.
just this kind of, you end up using really specific mathematical, specifically a branch of like symbolic logic within math to understand these arguments, because it's so easy to kind of get caught up in, well, I mean, in semantics. It's almost like a general semantics, not semantics, but a different branch called general semantics, where we're confusing what we call things with what the actual thing is, just because it kind of makes sense. It's not really how it works. And when you apply math to the biology.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. That's really very helpful, very clarifying. And on that note, looking at where you're sitting, you're in this room with this fantastic like monkey bars in the background, and other than the chair you're sitting in, there's no like big giant couch or all that stuff. And I know you have a great post on your website for those who want to look it up about a video, mostly furniture-free living, and that you just don't have a ton of furniture in your house. So I just wanted you to speak to that a little bit, because again, the frequency of time, but in plushy couch, affects our certain outcomes in our body. And as a parent, because I'm a mother too, like what it means to raise children in a mostly furniture-free environment versus molding their butts to couches and chairs.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting because we are in a time in disease research or whether you're a parent, if you're a disease researcher, whether you're a practitioner, we're looking at this next population coming up and going, the health of this population underneath our generation, your and my generation, is worse than what we have. And it's in decline. And, it's like, what do you do? But yet no one wants to address the huge elephant in the room, which is we are training our children to be still, like whether we recognize it or not, because we don't delineate with specificity the difference between exercise and movement. We've just come to all subscribe to, if I exercise for that hour, it's enough. That's the key. And then we're going, but then there's all these other disease outcomes that are just genetic. We're not looking at the fact that we're all sedentary. And even more than being sedentary, which is inactivity, our periods of being sedentary are a repetition of the exact same geometrical configuration, to the point of you've now created thickenings within your arteries at the bends in your joints that you maintain, and they do not go away when you stand up. Those thickenings are deep, and they affect the way your blood flows, and they affect the way plaque accumulates in those areas. We've lost our mobility in our muscles and joints, but that trickles down to mobility on a cellular level. We've lost the walls of your artery should always be adapting to pressures to keep your flow as smooth as possible, because laminar flow is smooth, turbulent flow is like when you're on an airplane, very turbulent, and it's the turbulent flow that wounds the walls of the arteries. And you need to be able to adapt, because you're constantly getting up and getting down and increasing, your heart rate, and all these things cause surges and movements of blood. But when you have supple walls, just like if you have a supple body, it's a lot easier to get into a new joint configuration. If you have supple walls of your arteries, your arteries are able to change their diameter, which then can mitigate or reduce the effect of those surges in heart rate. And that's the natural mechanism that you have, that allows your heart to be working at all different levels without doing any sort of damage. But we've got these very static, constant geometrical positions, and we've got corresponding hardening within our arteries. And then we take that hardened artery body out and do an exercise where we increase surges. But there's nothing we can do with the suppleness. So that was kind of like a tangent of going back to with kids, is we need to look more at, like you and I and people who are watching this and people who are presenting on this understand, like, okay, we get that it's about mobility and health has this mobility component, but yet so many of us, because we're just culturally trained, like there's only so much you can see outside of your own culture. It's like, but don't I need a playpen and a Moby and a stroller and a high chair and shoes and clothes and diapers and don't I need all like you? It's so hard to see to translate how these things are the beginnings. Don't I want my kids to be still and quiet, and don't they have to go to school and sit down? So like you have this huge kind of uphill that you're working against, where we've ingrained immobility so much into our culture that our culture kind of depends on it.
Yeah, it does.
So that all being said, I live in this culture too. I like to present the whole thing because scientifically I see us moving away from the problem because we don't see the problem as something that can change. So we keep talking about the childhood obesity and the juvenile osteoporosis and the fact that kids are already having back pain and knee pain and orthotics as something like, what's happening? We don't know what's happening because we're not talking about the fact that this is your choice. So I like to present that, but then I also present that I'm a parent, I'm a total realist, I participate in the real world, so here are my solutions within a modern context. And I don't like to tell people what to do, I like to tell people how things work, and they can choose to do what they want, because this is not a lifestyle for everyone. And I understand.
Yeah, but it's pretty sweet. I want to come over and play.
It's fun. It's totally fun. It's like your mind. Your mind the mind is the part that resists letting the culture go. The body is like, I will shed my cultural skin at any time because it's not usually a cultural skin that's serving most of us. But the mind part, it's just every single minute of every single day, your thoughts are shaped by this experience, and so it does take a constant. I need a grid. I have like an alignment in my body and alignment in my mind way I check my thoughts against, because it's too hard sometimes to see when you're participating within your own culture just out of habit, I guess.
Yeah, sure. And for those, I know it's tough. I don't mean to ask you to do the like, give me 5 quick tips, like,
No!
I know. But, for those who, school is a big one. My son's 6. He just started first grade. First grade is when it's like, and now we sit.
That's right. I know.
All the time.
Let the commence.
Yes, and it makes me insane, and I'm looking into my own options. But for those who it's like, private school is not an option financially, and my kid's going to be sitting at school, I'm not asking you to solve everyone's ills, but like, what are some of the important things to bear in mind when you know that your child's butt is in a seat most of the time?
Well, I would like to see more parents become involved in changing that. First of all, that needs to happen. That needs to start happening at some point. Yeah. I can only do so much. With
Save us, Katy.
Yeah, please. I'd like to start seeing, and it's about breaking down inactivity to geometry. It's like, kids get recess. It's like, okay. Right. And I understand, like, we're trying to work with the whole model of how can one adult be responsible for 28 to 37 children by themselves. It's like, it does not work out of the chair. Like, I totally get that. But what you can do as a parent would be then would be to offer an environment that was as most conducive to movement as possible the rest of the time. Yeah. Which may or may not, be something like this. Yeah. That's the reason I don't have furniture. It's like our community is very large. Our family's community is very large, but the amount of people within our community, our actual real life, not on the internet, fake friend community, are people who have no idea what we do for a living. Like, we're just kind of, the weird friends who, it's like, why are we always eating dinner on your floor? It's like, this is how we do it. And they love us, and we love them, and that's fine. But the reason I don't make my home more comfortable for the people in my life is because we will use it. It's the same reason I don't keep ice cream in the freezer all of the time. Because when you have it, it's like, I don't keep junk food on hand for my guests if they don't like, the meal with kale I made. It's not like, I made hot dogs in case you didn't like that. And I shouldn't really put hot dogs in the junk food category because hot dogs are delicious. But it's inconvenient for sure for the people coming over at first. But now I've just found that we don't sit up. If I had a couch, if I go to my mom's house or to any of our friends' house, I'm in the couch the whole time because it's like, oh, this feels so good. I never get to lay and lounge and or lie and lounge And so I just don't have it. It's not an option.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the bullet we bit, and it took a lot of years. I mean, we've slowly been transitioning over many years.
Yeah.
But as a parent, that's just kind of what you have to do. If parents could see movement in the same context that they see food,
yeah,
I think that parents get food
mm-hmm.
and kind of going, okay, I understand more nutritious food versus less nutritious food.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that there's food that children or we all love, but that there's consequences to that food.
Yeah.
Which sometimes you totally take. You're like, whatever, here's a hot chocolate, just be quiet for 20 minutes and I'll deal with the other thing on the other side. And you get like, there's those switch offs all the time that you make as a parent. But, you know, it's such a long period of time when kids are, I'm going back to your original question now. I know you're happy.
I'm happy about all of it.
Okay.
It's all good.
Yeah. It's such a long period of time that what you can do is offer not only non-sitting time, but also more moving time, but specifically more of a natural movement. Because I know a lot of parents are, you know, concerned with my kids not getting enough movement, and so kids are taking lots of movement types classes. Like people, they're doing tumbling, they're doing all these things, and those are fantastic and those are necessary. But what children are not doing any longer is walking.
Yeah.
And walking is a huge critical piece of development on every level of where you can be well and on every type of tissue. So I see a lot of parents getting their walk or their jog, but their kids are next to them on their bike.
Yeah.
And that's fine, but bike riding, again, if we look at it geometrically, is not the same thing as walking. The loads are not the same. And so we really have to set up some sort of time for that. And I used to live in an area that had a park, and I would be up early in the morning teaching, you know, an outdoor park class or whatever. And there was a mom who came out there at like 6:45 in the morning, and she had her 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old. I don't know. I didn't have kids at that time, so I thought they were all, you know,
right. Yeah. I know.
Now they're older. And they were walking and running and playing and moving. Like it wasn't like going on the teeter-totter or going on slide or whatever. It was actually moving across. And I asked her, and she was like, I do this for him before I go to school, before I take him to school, because we just found that he couldn't concentrate as much. He had such a hard time being still, because again, imagine taking a wild animal and getting it to sit still. You know, there's kids, I mean, there's different personality types, and there's some kids who like to sit more than others, and unfortunately those kids get kind of labeled as, you know, problematic or whatever. And it's like, oh, they've been still for 8 hours and every single neurological proprioceptive reflex is like,
I know.
And, and it's like, sorry, your biology, it works perfectly.
Yeah, I know. You're really faulty that way.
That's right. So just doing that, you know, before and after, which again, as a parent, just causes it's just more of your life. It's just more of your free time having to go someplace else. But the benefit is you need that movement too. Everything that your child needs, you need as well. So if you kind of saw it as like, y'all get up and do something early. Like I get up and walk with my 2-year-old a half a mile to a mile in the morning. And it's just our time. And let's everyone else kind of get some sleep because we're both early risers. And then we do it again midday, and then we do it again at nighttime, and it's just what we do. Also, we don't have a TV. Screen time and kids.
Makes a big difference.
Screen time is a new risk, kind of like sitting was a new risk factor, besides inactivity. Screen time is a new risk factor for bone density problems as adults. Screen time as kids. Yeah. So before it used to be specifically, did you exercise or not? Well, now they're going, well, if you did exercise but you had a lot of screen time, then your bone density can be less optimal as an adult, which is eventually what it becomes, osteopenia and osteoporosis. So as parents, like, oh, it's okay, they can watch TV because they went to their tumbling class or they had recess. It's like, we're so missing that quantity or the frequency of loads that is required for normal biological function that as adults, we're like, where is all this coming from? You know, I don't know. We have to start foundations and spend millions of dollars trying to figure out how to solve a problem that we all know the answer to.
Right.
It's like, is there anything else we can do besides that? It's like, no.
No, you have to just actually stand up and move around.
Yeah, you're just going to have to actually move
Right.
around.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Is there anything else I can buy?
No, is there a product? And on this note, speaking of parenting and everything, I know you presented at the Ancestral Health Symposium this year, which unfortunately I wasn't able to attend. And last I checked, videos are not up. So I haven't seen your talk, but I know it was related to, is in the general sphere of parenting. Am I correct or am I crazy?
It was more specific to 1 to 5 years, specifically the physical development, and I believe they're going to be up sometime in October.
Okay, great.
It takes such a long time. There's so many people.
Sure.
They have so many presenters, and all their volunteers are usually like before and during, and then they all go back to school. They're all graduate students and studying different stuff.
Right.
But what it was called paleo parenting.
Mm-hmm.
And I started off my talk saying, this is actually not a parenting, a how-to. I'm not a person who likes to give like how-to advice.
Sure.
I know that people will interpret that as what I say a lot of times is like how-to, but it's more like, here's a set of information that you might not have considered.
Mm-hmm.
And so for AHS, which is Ancestral Health Symposium, was a presentation on loads. It was a presentation on I'll kind of give it to you just in a real quick synopsis. And everyone can watch it. It's free when it comes out. It's about a process that we're not really familiar with, that most people are not familiar with, which is called Meccano transduction. Mm-hmm. So most people, when we look at disease, most disease is looked at from a chemical, like what's the environmental, if you're looking at epigenetic factors, it's like what are the chemical precursors within a cellular environment that lead to a certain biological outcome. Mm-hmm. And a biological outcome in this case would be like the shape of a body or a disease that the body would experience. So that's what I call like a biological outcome. Mm-hmm. And so we just think of, you have genes and what you get is based on your genetic mass. But there's a whole, and we call it the genome, but there's a process, there's a whole set of equipment that every cell has, which are like the mechanical underworkings of that cell. And there's movement within the cell. You actually have fibers, like your cytoskeleton within your cell and the extracellular matrix that are made up of actin, just like your muscles are. Mm-hmm. So we think of movement as just something that's happening with these levers, but your cells are basically moving around, not just because they're coming with, they're actually sensing loads. They can sense accelerations mm-hmm. and their position relative to gravitational force. And they're constantly collecting data about how best to respond to that situation. Mm-hmm. And some of what you get is pre-programmed. It's like you're going to get like if you look at a bone, like you can tell it's a femur. It's like, hey, that's a femur. But you can look at femurs of people who've done different things throughout their lifetime, and they have different, that's a slightly different shape or distribution of mass and density. So that changes, and so those formations or formations or the variations, whether it's in shape or density, is called bone robusticity. So we all have bones that are shaped not just by our genes. That part is moot. That part's going to happen anyway. Mm-hmm. It's about the loads that you experienced, but keeping in mind that a load is about the frequency of the load, the duration of the load, the direction of the load, the magnitude of the load. All of those things affect the shape that you get. Yeah. And so at AHS, I talked specifically about breastfeeding, and it's so movement creates forces. And this is another reason I like to separate movement and exercise. Is like, you don't think of an infant breastfeeding as like, did they get their exercise? Right. But it was like, well, we can see historically a decrease in the shape and the formation of the palate and of the jaw, where now our teeth don't fit. Like your teeth are coming out genetically programmed to come out into a bone that should have been formed by 4 or 5 years of breastfeeding. Mm-hmm. But not just, as I brought up in AHS, not just did you breastfeed or not, but the frequency of breastfeeding. Did you breastfeed 4 times a day, or did you breastfeed 12 times a day? Did you breastfeed for 30 minutes at a time or 1 minute at a time? Because each one of those creates a certain stimulation to the mechanosensors. So mechanosensors are parts of the cell that sense mechanical stimulation. And the cool thing about mechanosensors is that they need to be refreshed. So if you put a load, it's like a sponge. If I just smush a sponge together, that's one load that it gets. But then if it just sits here like that, it doesn't get any more information. It just gets stale. So we've found that it's the repetitious load and unload that refreshes a cell, that allows it to adapt to what it just felt. So frequency is a huge variable. Not only are we not moving in a wide or varying enough way, the frequency of that movement is very low, or very different than what it was during that period of time in which we were evolving to those needs. That would be like the evolutionary biological perspective. Is that's what paleo basically is. It's like your body works best, doing things that are most like what was going on, before the Industrial Revolution, before the Agricultural Revolution. So there's all these kind of timelines. And so that's what the AHS conference was. So I did breastfeeding, baby holding versus baby wearing versus strollering. Like, what are the differences mechanically between the three? In a very simple way, just about vertical versus horizontal, variation in position. If your baby's fixed versus your baby has freedom to change positions at will. And then the last thing I did was looking at, we don't, as modern humans, like if you're like, why is your baby crying? People with babies or without babies, like, oh, well, it's tired, or it's hungry, or it's got a pain, or it's, got a dirty diaper, or whatever. But modern hunter-gatherer populations see the baby is undermoved as a viable reason that it's crying. In fact, it's like the first go-to point of why it's crying.
That's really interesting.
And it's very interesting. And in recorded data about how they perceive that, I think anthropological data, it's a lot of times it's kind of like, oh, they just have some sort of deeper sense about what their child would need, but they're actually, upon interview, it's like, no, they need to move for circulation. They need to move to keep mobile. They have a whole rigorous gymnastics. This is modern modern hunter-gatherer tribes. They have a whole routine of movements that they put their newborns, like at 2 weeks old through 3 months old, that involve like single arm suspensions, putting them on the back, and then slowly standing up to cultivate their grip reflex. It's a total trip, and it's so different than, it's fascinating. It's totally fascinating, and it's kind of scary. You're like, wow, they're holding that 2-week-old from their arm, and and they do like a little bit of shaking, and it's done by the grandmothers, and the grandmothers do it for all the kids, and they were trained by someone else, and it just shows again the wide variance across human belief about what movement is. I think we've put a lot of emphasis on I don't even know if it's Western, it's certainly American, like what we gather from the way we think is, what should be applied to, this is cognitive theory, and this is human behavior, and this is how the human brain works. It's like, yeah, not so much now. We're starting to see that really this is the thought process that goes on under certain circumstances. So I ended AHS with, I would like people to recognize that a lack of movement is part of what a child is giving off at all times. Is I'm undermoved, and the outcome, whether it's an infant crying or whatever, is my body's way of telling you that I'm missing something crucial. And it's not exercise, it's movement. It's not like, oh, good, well, then let's go out and run, and let's get on your bike and go and fill your lungs. It's like, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about natural human movement at a frequency that optimizes the development that's in progress.
That's fascinating. I can't wait to watch your talk. So for those who are feeling the same way I am, that will be over at Ancestral Health Symposium, which is the .org, I believe.
.org,
And other than that, thank you so much for your time. I would love to hog you for like a week of talking, but I know you have a very full life, so I won't do that. And people can check you out and all your goodness more at, is alignedandwell.com the site that you prefer people be sent to? Because I know you also have restorativeexercise.com.
I think Katy says, Katy.
Okay.
KatySays.com. That's the best entry point because, you know, there's the Institute, which is for, you know, practitioners and courses.
Sure.
And then you've got Aligned and Well, which is really just kind of like a you know, a place you can get DVDs. Katy Says really is where I've put most of my work. It's a place that is like, I want to know more right now. It's like you can go there and you can just start reading.
Yeah. And your book that's coming out shortly, Alignment Matters, is a compendium of the first 5 years of that blog, which I personally can't wait to read. I've already pre-ordered.
It's £1.50.
I'm sure. I believe it.
And it's coming, like, the truck is coming today. They're supposed to be bringing like 3,000 books, 3,000 1.5-pound books to my house. And it's like, well, I just put them in the living room.
Yeah, right. I know. Something new to climb on. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much for your work and for taking the time to talk with the Fascia Freedom Fighters tribe. And enjoy the monkey bars.
All right. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Bye.